Big Shaq's daughter stepped out of the bank with pride. But behind her, a plan was already in motion, a silent attack on legacy, masked as routine. When the lie became too loud, Big Shaq did what no one expected. He didn't shout, he exposed everything. This wasn't just a reaction, it was a reckoning. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. They say time changes people, but I think it just shows you who they always were. Atlanta changed. Sure, new buildings rose like weeds, the streets busier, louder, but my corner of it stayed the same, brick by brick, sweat by sweat. I helped build this little piece of calm, not with my hands, not with a hammer, but with presence, with roots. That's what you do when life gives you a platform and a past. You plant something that can't be shaken by wind or whispered away by history. The mornings were quiet on our side of town. Folks jogged without looking over their shoulder. Moms walked strollers with iced coffee in one hand, peace in the other. My house sat near the edge of Glenwood, big enough to hold memories, but not so big it screamed celebrity. That was never me, not off the court. I never needed marble floors to feel important, just space to breathe, and a neighborhood that called me Shaq, like they'd call anybody by name. No cameras, no autographs, just Shaq, you coming to the block party this weekend. And I always did. That morning started like most. I was on my porch, in a weathered lawn chair I refused to replace, sipping lemon water while the sky opened slow. The birds hadn't even started singing yet. That hour, that hush before the city yawns. It's where I do most of my thinking. No agents, no noise, just me, the stillness, and whatever thoughts rolled in. Miara came out the front door like a breeze. Sudden, smiling, carrying too much for one hand. Purse, folder, phone. She had her mother's eyes, sharp, no nonsense, always asking questions without opening her mouth. She was taller now, college-bound, her frame holding the quiet confidence of someone raised by love, but hardened by glimpses of truth. That morning, she wore jeans, white sneakers, and a navy hoodie, hair in a ponytail, clean, grown, trying to do things on her own. "I'm heading to First Trust," she said, already halfway down the steps. "You want me to roll with you?" I asked, half knowing her answer. "I got it, Pops. I'm not 12. She smiled, but there was a flicker behind her grin, a mix of excitement and nerves. I knew that feeling too well. It lives in every black kid who steps into a space where they're not expected to belong. The bank wasn't a battlefield, but the people inside might carry quiet weapons, assumptions, glances, invisible judgments. I wanted to tell her that, warn her, but she wouldn't hear it. Not yet. "Just don't let anybody rush you," I said. "And don't sign anything that doesn't smell like sense." She nodded, eyes on her phone, already somewhere else. As she pulled off in her car, a used silver SUV she picked out herself, I watched the taillights disappear down the street and felt a pang that caught me off guard. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the ache of letting go, a kind of fatherly dread that no money, no fame, no height or muscle could block. She was stepping into a world I knew too well, and I couldn't go with her. Back inside, the house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that makes your own thoughts echo. I walked past framed photos, me holding Mara in a hospital blanket, Shawnee's hand over both of ours. Another from her 5th grade science fair, one where she's in a Lakers jersey, beaming. I wasn't always around back then. The road, the games, but I swore I'd always show up when it mattered. And I did. The phone buzzed. Not a text, not a call, just a calendar alert. Board meeting with Justice for Tomorrow Fund, noon. I'd almost forgotten. That fund had my name on it. Literally. It was one of the many things I poured myself into after retirement. Criminal justice reform, scholarships, neighborhood revitalization. But none of it felt like enough. Because no matter how many bills I paid or programs I funded, there was always another story, another name, another headline that made you question whether you were patching cracks in a dam built to burst. When Manera got back that afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen counter, flipping through an old playbook out of habit. She dropped her bag on the table and opened the fridge like she lived alone. She pulled out a bottle of water, closed the door with her hip, and leaned on the counter. "That bank smelled like desperation and bad cologne," she said, half joking. I looked up. "Everything goes smooth?" "I guess." The teller asked me 3 times if the account was really mine. And then she tried to explain basic saving to me like I was 12. I told her I'd been balancing accounts since I was 14. I kept my voice even. You use your name, or your middle. She gave me a look. I said Miara O'Neal. I'm not hiding who I am. Sometimes it ain't hiding. Sometimes it's just avoiding a long conversation with a short-minded person. She shook her head. I'm not going to shrink, Pops. Not for them. I didn't argue. Couldn't. Because she was right. And brave. And also just 20. She thought strength was speaking loud. I knew real strength was knowing when silence spoke louder. That night we ate dinner in the den. I grilled. She made her TikTok famous mac and cheese. We watched an old playoff rerun on mute. Laughed at how stiff my form looked in '99. She sat with her legs tucked under her, texting between bites. Comfortable. Safe. Pops? She asked, randomly. You ever get followed? I paused. The question hung in the air like smoke. Yeah, I said slowly. More times than I can count. Because you were famous? Because I was black. The fame just made it easier for people to justify it. She nodded. Eyes on her phone, but somewhere else entirely. I think somebody watched me walk to the car. Just stood there. I got in fast. Locked the doors. Probably nothing. I studied her face. No fear. Just uncertainty. That made it worse. The not knowing. The gaslight that flickers in your gut and tells you maybe it's in your head. But it never is. You trust your gut? I asked. She nodded. Then don't second guess it. Ever. She looked at me. Really looked. For the first time that day, her age showed. I'm not scared, she said, but her voice was softer. I know, I said, but I am. That was the part I never told reporters. Never put in interviews or sound bites. That under the strength, the jokes, the stats, there was always this hum, this background noise that came from being a black father in America. You raise your kids to stand tall, to be proud, to never shrink, but in the back of your head, you're always doing the math. Always playing the what ifs. What if they speak up too loud? What if they get stopped on a quiet road? What if they do everything right and still get caught in someone else's target? It's not paranoia. It's preparation. After she went to bed, I sat on the porch again. Same chair. Same sky. Only this time it didn't feel quiet. It felt loaded, like something had shifted. I scanned the street. Nothing. No strange cars. No shadows. But my chest stayed tight. They say the worst storms come after the stillest skies. I didn't know it then, but something was already unraveling. Not in a loud, obvious way, but like a string pulled from the inside. Slowly, invisibly.
The calm wasn't peace.
It was the deep inhale before the scream, the last clean note before the sirens, the quiet before everything changed. And I could feel it coming. The sun hit just right that day. Late morning warmth coating the streets like honey, with a light breeze chasing away any thread of summer heaviness. Mara pulled into the parking lot of First Trust Community Bank, her grip on the steering wheel tighter than usual. Not because she was nervous, not outwardly, but something about the day made her second-guess things she'd done a dozen times before. She had rehearsed everything, the transaction details, the polite but firm tone she'd use, the ID tucked in the side pocket of her purse. Independence had a rhythm to it, and today was just another beat in the song she was learning to sing solo. The parking lot was half full. Typical for a weekday. One silver sedan, idled in a corner spot. Engine off but windows slightly down. Like someone was inside but didn't want to be seen. A dark green SUV had just backed out, revealing a clean spot near the front doors. Mara eased into it, glanced once at her rearview mirror, then checked her makeup in the visor. Minimal, natural, intentional. She didn't want to stand out. As she stepped out, a man stood leaning against the wall near the ATM. He was dressed too sharp for a small bank, in East Atlanta, tailored gray suit, black loafers that looked expensive but understated, and a pair of dark aviators, even though the sun wasn't that bright. His posture was casual, like he belonged there, like he was waiting for someone, but something about him felt staged. The crispness of the crease in his pants, the way his tie sat perfectly symmetrical. He didn't glance around like most people do when waiting. He didn't scroll on his phone. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, unmoving, watching. Mara walked past him, her heart skipping a beat. She didn't let it show. She looked straight ahead, calm, composed, but she could feel his eyes tracing every step. Not in a flirtatious way, not in an aggressive way. Something colder, measured, like she was being assessed. Inside, the bank smelled like lemon floor cleaner and printer ink. Mara approached the counter, gave her name, and presented her ID. She was there to transfer funds from her personal savings to a new investment account she'd been planning for weeks. Her first step toward real financial independence, guided by some of the advisors Shaq had connected her with. The teller was polite, but asked too many questions. 3 times, she verified the account number. Once, she even asked if Mara had parental approval. It was infuriating, but Mara didn't bite. She just smiled, nodded, and completed the transfer. No need to make a scene, not here. But even inside, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She glanced once through the glass door. The man in the suit was still there, now standing straighter, arms crossed over his chest like someone on duty. By the time she stepped outside, he was gone. Or so she thought. As she approached her SUV, she caught a glimpse of movement in her side mirror. Not close, but far enough away that she couldn't be sure. A flash of gray disappearing behind a tall hedge that bordered the lot. She paused, keys in hand. Her heart ticked faster now, but still she didn't panic. She got in, locked the doors, and drove out slowly, checking the mirror again. Nothing. Still, the air around her felt wrong, like static before a storm. She turned the music up, mostly to drown out the questions rolling around in her head. Was it just a weird guy? Had she imagined the whole thing? But her gut said no, and her gut had never failed her. Back home, she parked, entered the code at the gate, and walked inside. Shaq was at the grill out back, talking on speakerphone with someone from the foundation. She watched him for a moment through the glass. This giant of a man, wearing an apron that read Chef Big Diesel, flipping salmon fillets, like it was the only thing that mattered in the world. He looked peaceful, unbothered. She waited until the call ended. There was a guy outside the bank, she said casually, like it wasn't still sitting in her chest. Shaq looked up, sunglasses resting on his forehead now, eyes narrowing slightly. What kind of guy? Tall, white, maybe mid-30s, gray suit. Just watching, didn't say anything. But he was there when I walked in, and gone when I came out. I think he circled around after. Shaq turned off the grill, set the tongs down slowly. Could have been a security guy. No badge, no bank logo. He wasn't on his phone. Just standing there, watching people. Watching me. Shaq gave a slow nod. The kind that didn't mean agreement, just absorption. He didn't rush to conclusions, didn't tell her she was wrong. But his face changed. The line between his brows deepened, and his shoulders, normally relaxed, lifted just slightly. Did he follow you? I don't think so. But I didn't check the whole way back. Shaq walked to the porch railing, eyes scanning the street like it might offer up answers. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then, might have been nothing. But nothing feels like something when your gut says so, he said, finally meeting her eyes. You worried? She asked. Nah, he said too quickly. But inside, worry had already pulled up a chair and made itself at home. Later that night, while Mara was in her room playing music and responding to DMs, Shaq sat in his office, phone in hand. He wasn't calling anyone, not yet, just thinking, processing. He'd seen that look before, the way someone tries not to look like they're looking, in arenas, in airports, even in his own driveway a few times, when things got tense in the media. But this was different, measured, calculated, not the gaze of a fan, not the look of someone who just happened to be there. He pulled up the neighborhood app on his phone, scrolled through recent posts. No mentions of suspicious activity near the bank, no reports. He opened his home security app. Footage was clean, but it wasn't peace he felt. It was the silence before something decided to speak. The worst part wasn't not knowing what that man wanted. It was not knowing if Mira was the target, or just the message. And that was a question Shaq couldn't ignore. He didn't tell her that night. No point in raising alarms without answers. But the next morning, while she slept, he made a call to someone he hadn't spoken to in years. A man named Delroy, the kind of friend you don't keep close but never fully let go of. Delroy worked in digital security now, used to be NSA, had a habit of uncovering things that weren't supposed to be seen. Shaq didn't give details, just a name, a location, and a feeling. I just need to know if there's something I ain't seeing, he said. Delroy paused. You think she's being followed? I think somebody wants me to think so. And that possibility, that subtle difference made all the difference in the world. 2 days after Mara's visit to the bank, things felt ordinary again. Or at least pretending they came easier. She had a class to prep for, a campus meetup that evening, and her head buried in a new podcast series about financial literacy for young adults. Shaq had spent the morning at a community youth center downtown, then stopped by the rec league to check in on some of the kids he mentored. The air had a spring crispness to it, and even though the unease hadn't fully left, it had settled into the background like a shadow under a tree, always there, but easy to ignore in the daylight. That illusion broke around 4 p.m., when Myra came through the front door, holding a flat, unmarked envelope in her left hand. She wasn't panicked, but she wasn't casual either. Her eyebrows were furrowed in that way she had when she was processing something that didn't quite compute. She didn't say anything as she handed it to Shaq, just placed it on the kitchen counter and stepped back. Shaq looked down at it. No return address, no postage stamp, no label, just a plain, cream envelope. Too nice to be random, too clean to be tossed from a car window. He opened it carefully, sliding out the contents like he expected it to bite. Inside was a bank withdrawal slip. First Trust's logo printed in the top left corner, filled out with Myra's full name, her account number, and a $7,500 withdrawal that neither of them had authorized. Paper clipped to the slip was a Polaroid. The image was grainy but unmistakable. Myra, outside the bank, walking to her car, taken from behind a nearby parked vehicle. It wasn't blurry, it wasn't rushed. Whoever had taken it had done so deliberately. At close range, she was mid-step, keys in hand, head slightly turned. The exact moment between leaving the building and noticing she might not be alone. Shaq's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. Where'd you find this? He asked. It was in the mailbox. No postmark. Just sitting there. I thought maybe it was junk mail until I opened it in the driveway. You touch anything else in there? No, just that. He nodded, then reached for a pair of gloves from the utility drawer. Latex from an old box they kept for grilling. Slayed them on, handling the envelope like evidence. He placed it in a large Ziploc, zipped it slowly, eyes never leaving the slip or the photo. You didn't make that withdrawal, right? Obviously not, Miura said, but her voice was thinner than usual. He didn't respond with reassurance. Not yet. Something about this wasn't just threatening, it was orchestrated. Precision like this didn't come from random creeps or harmless stalkers. It came from people who knew systems. People who didn't need to break in to get what they wanted. That night passed quietly, unnaturally so. Mira stayed in her room with the door locked, headphones on, pretending to study. Shaq sat in his office again, this time not just reflecting, but reviewing every camera angle from the property, every alert from the gate logs. He even checked door sensor records. Nothing. No motion detected in the last 48 hours, except for a raccoon at 2 a.m. and the garbage truck's mechanical arm at dawn. Around 3:04 a.m., Shaq stirred awake in the dark. Something, a shift in air, a frequency shift in the silence, had pulled him from sleep. He sat up, alert but still. Then came the sound. 3 knocks. Soft. Precise. Not pounding. Not rushed. Like someone who wanted to be heard, but not discovered. He moved quietly from his bedroom, steps like memory foam beneath his weight. He didn't turn on any lights, just approached the door slowly, checked the peephole. No one. He moved to the front window, peeled the curtain an inch. Still nothing. But he knew what he heard. And whoever had been there, they hadn't left in a hurry. There was no sound of tires, no scrambling footsteps, just nothing. Like a ghost exiting a room. It never entered. He walked back to the home security panel and pulled up the footage from every angle. Porch, gate, driveway. Each showed a clean, uneventful time-lapse of the hour. Birds fluttering, wind brushing the trees, lights from distant cars. But not a single figure near the door, not even a shadow. He clicked back another hour, then another. Still clean. He switched over to the data log and stared at it for a long time. The timestamps for 3:02 a.m. to 3:09 a.m. were missing. No error codes, no footage lost due to storm or glitch. Just blank space, like the system had simply skipped time. That had only happened once before, years ago, during a tech glitch. But this was different. It wasn't a failure. It was intentional. Someone had accessed the security system and erased just enough to leave a hole. Not a large one, just enough to let doubt slip through. He called Delroy. Didn't matter that it was nearly 4 in the morning. Delroy answered. After the second ring, his voice half asleep, half alert. "You're calling now. That means it got weird." Shaq didn't waste time. Someone dropped off a fake bank slip and a photo of Miara. Camera system caught nothing. But the feed's been scrubbed. How clean? Too clean. It's not wiped. It's surgically missing. Delroy whistled low. "You got remote access logs?" Shaq sent them through, waited in silence while Delroy typed in the background. A minute later he responded. "Yeah, you've been breached. But not fully. Just piggybacked. They looped a static feed over your live stream, then deleted the overwrite time. This ain't amateur stuff, man. This is high level. What do they want?" Delroy paused. "They don't want to be seen. Not yet." That envelope was a message. A teaser. Whoever this is, they're not trying to take anything. They're trying to make her feel watched. Vulnerable. Shaq's jaw tensed. "They chose the wrong house." "No," Delroy replied, his tone flat. "They chose the right one. That's what makes this dangerous." When the call ended, Shaq didn't go back to bed. He stood at the window until the sky shifted from charcoal to pale gray. There was no knock again. No noise. But the silence was heavier now. Not just empty, but charged. The next morning, Myra came downstairs groggy, expecting another day of weird caution. She found Shaq already dressed, a duffel bag at his feet, keys in hand.
"We're getting out for a couple days," he said. "Just low-key, upstate, somewhere we can think."
"Think about what?" "About why someone would want us to feel small without ever laying a finger on us." She didn't argue. She knew something had crossed a line. And whatever came next, it wasn't just about a photo or a knock. It was about control. And Shaq had no intention of giving it up. Not silently. Not ever. The cabin they escaped to was tucked into a forgotten slice of North Georgia, where the trees rose tall and thick, and the only sound after sunset was the rustle of wind through pine needles. It was Shaq's fallback, a place he rarely mentioned, even to close friends. No Wi-Fi, no cameras, no media, just wood, stone, and a dirt road that disappeared into silence. He hadn't been there in years, not since the night after Kobe's retirement, when the weight of legacies and regrets became too heavy to keep under the lights. But this time, it wasn't about reflection. It was about isolation and protection. Menara didn't ask questions on the way up. She knew from the stiffness in his shoulders and the way he gripped the wheel that now wasn't the time. The message had been sent, not through words, not through violence, but through subtlety. Whoever was behind this didn't want to hurt her outright. They wanted her off balance. They wanted Shaq uncertain. And they'd nearly succeeded. Delroy arrived the next morning. He didn't knock, just parked his black Impala at the bottom of the gravel drive and walked up like he already knew the path. That was Delroy's way. A man who never asked if the door was open because he never expected it to be closed. Shaq met him at the porch, a long, silent look exchanged before any words passed. Delroy was lean, dressed in worn jeans, and a flannel shirt that looked like it had seen more basements than bonfires. His eyes were always scanning, like every room held a riddle. "You got ghosts up here, man," Delroy muttered as he set his bag down. "Not the kind that float," Shaq replied, "the kind that follow." Inside, Delroy set up shop on the cabin's rustic kitchen table, unpacking equipment from a weathered leather case, 2 modified laptops, 1 signal sniffer, and a tablet loaded with forensic software he built himself after walking away from government work. There was a time Delroy had the feds calling him a genius and the streets calling him a ghost. Now he was just a guy who liked answers. Shaq handed him the flash drive with the surveillance logs and security data from the house. Delroy plugged in, scanned, then whistled. "This ain't your usual ride-or-die tech creep. Whoever did this had access to a deep scan erasure tool. Military grade, possibly ex-contractor. This ain't something you buy off the dark web. This is leased, protected, used for scrubbing elite-level tracks." Shaq leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. So this wasn't some fanboy with a drone and a death wish. Delroy shook his head slowly. Nah. This was surgical. They didn't just erase footage. They replaced it, looped in safe visuals, while they acted in real time. That's precision most people can't afford unless someone's backing them. Shaq's jaw flexed. So who would want to do that? And why go through Mira? Delroy glanced up. Because she's the soft point in your armor. You're public, protected by fame and narrative. She's real, reachable. If someone wanted to send you a message about staying out of something, that's how they'd do it. Shaq paced across the room, every step sounding heavier in the echo of exposed wood and quiet threat. I've only got one line of work that stirs people up these days. Justice for tomorrow. The grants. The expos. That new push to reinvestigate cold cases from the 90s. Some of those fingers point toward the same corporate pockets that funded prison labor and private law enforcement. Maybe we're stepping on something. Delroy nodded. You ever hear of Opal Grid? Shaq frowned. What is it? Private network. Invitation only. Used by elite financiers, XX and certain ex-military contractors. Clean on the surface, but it's rumored they run information exchanges underneath. Data laundering. Influence brokerage. One name kept popping up while I was tracing the ghost code from your system. Can't prove anything yet, but I think whoever's watching you is connected. Mara entered the room mid-conversation, tying her hoodie tight. I googled Opal Grid, she said. Nothing, just a gemstone site, and a defunct architecture firm. Delroy raised an eyebrow. That's the point. Shaq turned toward her. You shouldn't be digging right now. She met his gaze without flinching. I'm not staying blind while someone makes me a pawn. I'm not just your daughter, Dad. I'm part of this. That cut deep, not because it was disrespectful, but because it was true. She wasn't a child anymore. She was walking into a world where silence didn't equal safety. Delroy looked between them, then back at his screen. There's more. The bank slip? It was real paper, real timestamp. But the transaction never processed in their system. It was a ghost transaction, created from inside First Trust's internal servers and printed on their stock, meaning someone had access inside the building. Shaq blinked. You saying it's an inside job? I'm saying it's more than just tech. This is infrastructure-level manipulation. Someone's trying to frame a narrative. They want to suggest that Mira's finances are compromised, that maybe there's a trail of dirty money, but the trail doesn't go anywhere. That's the trap. You follow it too far and you start digging into yourself. A slow breath escaped Shaq's lungs. So what's the next move? Delroy unplugged the drive and stood up. We bait them. Mira tilted her head. How? Next week, you announce you're launching a youth fund. Make it tied to First Trust. Say you're starting it with money from your savings. It's a fake fund, but it's public enough to stir attention. If they bite, we'll see their hand. Shaq looked out the window. The trees swayed like they were holding secrets. Everything about this felt backwards. Fighting an enemy he couldn't see, through means he didn't fully understand, in a game he didn't want to play. But he had no choice, not when the threat had already stepped past his gate. This stays between us, he said. No press, no advisors. We keep our moves quiet until we know who we're playing against. Delroy nodded. I'll monitor everything from remote channels. You'll have silent alerts on all your lines. And if they push again, we'll be ready. As the sun dipped below the tree line, the cabin dimmed. No knocks came that night. No photos. No ghosts. Just the weight of an invisible enemy settling deeper into the walls around them. But Shaq didn't feel helpless anymore. He felt focused. Because whoever was pulling the strings, they thought they understood power. But they didn't understand him. They didn't understand how a father thinks. How a protector waits. How someone who's been underestimated his whole life doesn't just take hits. He studies them, stores them, then hits back in ways no one sees coming. This wasn't over, not even close. By the time they returned from the cabin, the house didn't feel the same. It wasn't that anything was missing or rearranged. Everything was exactly where it should be. That was the problem, the untouched nature of it, the feeling of being studied through a layer of glass. It wasn't home anymore. It was evidence waiting to be catalogued. Shaq stepped in first, phone in one hand, eyes sweeping every angle like muscle memory. Mira followed quietly, hood up despite the Georgia heat, her earbuds in but nothing playing. She wasn't tuning out. She was holding on to rhythm, to breath, to a sense of normalcy that had started slipping between her fingers. Mira tried to get back to her routine, the ordinary steps of independence she had once craved so badly. She returned to campus, rejoined her mentorship group, sat in coffee shops with a book in one hand and her laptop open, acting like the world hadn't shifted under her feet. But the shift was real and subtle. It started with a missed text, or what she thought was missed. Her friend Trina had asked if she was okay, referencing a message Mira had supposedly sent at 2:47 a.m. It read, "I think I messed up. Don't trust them. They're not who they say." Mira never wrote it, never even woke that night. She scrolled her messages. Nothing there. But Trina had the screenshot, and the timestamp matched. Then came the email. A calendar invite for a fake job interview, marked as urgent internship opportunity, DO Global, sent from Mira's account to 3 of her professors. She didn't remember drafting it, didn't even recognize the subject line, but it was there in her sent folder, plain as day, complete with a PDF resume she never made, edited down to make her seem less like herself and more like a pawn. She sat frozen at her desk, staring at the screen. Then she powered down the laptop and placed it gently on the floor, like it was ticking. When Shaq got home later that day, she met him at the door. "I think my phone's been cloned," she said without preamble. Shaq stopped, reading her face before speaking. "What happened?" "My number sent a message. I didn't write. Then my email sent a calendar invite to 3 professors, with a fake resume." Shaq didn't move, didn't blink. His jaw clenched slowly, and his fingers curled once at his side. Then he pulled out his phone and opened the encrypted messaging app Delroy had installed. 20 minutes later, Delroy confirmed the worst. "They didn't just mirror her phone," he said. "They copied the SIM, spoofed her entire digital ID, and set up ghost accounts on campus Wi-Fi to funnel activity. Whoever did this is already 10 steps ahead, and they're smart enough to stay quiet. They're not after data, they're after influence." Shaq sat down heavily on the edge of the couch, rubbing his face. Why send fake messages? What's the goal? They want to rewrite the perception of who she is. Subtly, quietly, build a parallel image just close enough to doubt the original. Mira stood in the doorway, arms folded. "So they're not trying to erase me. They're trying to replace me." Delroy nodded grimly. "Exactly." That night the house was quiet again. But it wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet that comes from restraint, like the walls were holding in a scream that hadn't been given permission yet. Shaq stayed up late, scrolling through emails, then news alerts, then his own posts on social media from the last few months. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe signs, echoes, something that would tell him why. And then it came. An anonymous email. No subject line. No name. Just a single sentence in bold text. "You gave too much to the wrong people." No attachments. No threats. Just that. Shaq sat with it for a long time. The words burned differently. Not just as a father, but as a man who'd spent the last decade building something beyond himself. The clinics, the grants, the programs. Every dollar poured into education, justice, second chances, all of it anchored by the belief that legacy meant leaving behind something bigger than fame. And now someone was trying to turn that legacy into a liability. He forwarded the email to Delroy, with no message. Then he shut his laptop, turned off the lights, and sat in silence, staring into the dark like it held a code he needed to crack. In the days that followed, the tension thickened. The house became quieter, the rooms heavier with thought. Every sound was second-guessed, every interaction filtered through a lens of suspicion. Mira stopped using her phone entirely, relying on handwritten notes to communicate when she really needed to. Shaq had a new system installed, hardwired, analog, nothing that could be accessed remotely. He no longer trusted the digital world he once maneuvered so easily. Delroy's next call came at 3 a.m., which had become the unofficial hour of bad news. "I've traced a pattern," he said. 6 months ago, a nonprofit based in D.C. that shared your justice reform database suffered a breach. Internal donor lists were stolen. Then a former police chief, who partnered with your program, was implicated in a fraud case, also fake. Fabricated documents, AI-written emails. You see the theme. Shaq's voice was gravel. They're targeting people connected to the mission. Exactly. Not with weapons, with stories. They make it look like the very people fighting injustice are playing dirty. They erode trust from the inside. Shaq leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. "Why Mara?" "Because she's your legacy in real time. She's clean, young, a symbol, and they're trying to make her look like a scandal waiting to happen." Outside, dawn was breaking, the sky shifting from navy to dusty blue. Birds hadn't started yet. Even they seemed to sense that this wasn't a day for singing. Shaq stood up slowly, every inch of his frame carrying the weight of the moment. If they want to turn her into an example, he said, then we give them one. But it won't be the one they want. Delroy's voice sharpened. What are you thinking? We go public. But not loud. Not dramatic. Controlled. Real. We put the facts out. Carefully. No drama. No fear. Just truth. We let people see the strings before they get pulled into the show. You sure? Delroy asked. That could put a bigger target on her. Shaq's answer was quiet. Certain. The target's already there. We just stop pretending it's not. Later that day, Mamera sat across from him at the kitchen table, a legal pad between them. We tell the story our way, he said. Your words. Your truth. Not their fiction. She stared at the page for a long time, then picked up the pen. If I say it wrong, they'll twist it. If you don't say it at all, Shaq replied, they'll write it for you. The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was deliberate, full of choice. They were no longer playing defense. They were stepping into the storm. Together, heads high, eyes forward. And for the first time in days, the silence didn't feel like fear. It felt like resolve. The walls of Delroy's downtown office were lined with flat monitors, none of them bigger than 20 inches, but each lit with different layers of the same reality. Overlays of financial systems, blurred lines of code running like veins, names cross-referenced with dates, offshore account wire transfers, security protocols. It didn't look like justice work. It looked like surveillance, like the war room of someone who no longer trusted institutions to guard the truth. Shaq stood quietly behind him, arms folded, jaw locked in place. The soft hum of the hardware filled the silence while Delroy navigated deeper into the mess they hadn't asked to step in, but now couldn't afford to back away from. I tracked the photo, Delroy said, without turning around. The Polaroid. It's a digital replica. The actual photo was uploaded through a masked IP, routed through Belize. But the source system is registered through an internal network belonging to a financial firm called Cartwright Holdings. What? Shaq narrowed his eyes. Never heard of them. Exactly, Delroy replied, clicking twice. A company profile appeared. Vague mission statement. Pristine website. Board member names that looked clean on paper. But the connections, Delroy pointed out, painted a darker story. This is a laundering shell. They move funds for black market brokers and high-end real estate corruption. Legal on the surface, filthy underneath, mostly untouchable. But here's where it gets interesting. He tapped the screen, zooming into a set of internal transfers made 3 days after Mara's visit to First Trust Bank. On one line, a financial account opened in her name, with her full ID details. Social security number, photo, even a fake Georgia driver's license number. On the next, that account transferring $7,500 to a charity called Future Unity Initiative, an organization founded under Shaq's name 3 years ago. Shaq's brow furrowed. That's one of mine. Yeah, except this transfer never happened in your books. They used your charity as a phantom endpoint, to look legitimate, which means they're not just using Mara, they're using you. The monitor flicked again. A second fake account, this one under a fake LLC registered in Mira's name, listed as a tech consultant for the very same shell company. The paper trail made it look like she had been freelancing, routing transactions under the guise of software testing. But no real money had touched her hands. No IRS triggers. Just enough smoke to build a fire later. Shaq exhaled, his voice low. They're setting her up as a mule, framing her to make it look like I'm funneling money through my own daughter. Delroy nodded. And if it leaks? Suddenly it's not Shaq the philanthropist. It's Shaq the fixer. The manipulator. The fraud. It hit harder than any foul on the court ever had. Shaq stepped away from the monitor and walked toward the window, the Atlanta skyline casting thin streaks of light through the blinds. He had built his name for decades, not just on rebounds and championship rings, but on school fundraisers, youth scholarships, second chances for men who didn't get them the first time. His image had weight, and for most of his post-career life, he'd used it to open doors. But now that image was being twisted, cracked, reshaped by unseen hands. This is about discrediting everything I've touched, he said. Marriage is the leverage. Delroy finally turned, folding his arms. They're counting on you staying quiet, or swinging wide and getting sloppy. But we won't do either. Who are they, Del? Delroy hesitated, then clicked again. There's a firm in D.C., strategic policy lobbyists turned covert operatives. They don't work for governments. They work for interests. One of the names on Cartwright's shadow list has ties to a group that opposed one of your justice grants. They claimed it was reparations disguised as progress. Same group that lobbied against your involvement with prison reform in Mississippi. Shaq laughed once, dry. So, this is political? It's bigger than that. It's ideological. They're sending a message: you lifted too many people out, and now they want to plant seeds of doubt before you can do more. Shaq let the silence settle. Then finally, he asked, how do we stop it? We don't play defense, Delroy said. We go right into the vault. He laid out a plan, risky, but surgical. Delroy would trace the phantom account's activity, flag all associated transfers, and prep a leak, not to the press, but to a trusted public auditor who had helped bring down 2 white-collar crime rings years earlier. Meanwhile, Shaq would prep a statement, not a denial, not a fight, but a confession of the facts, the real ones. Quiet, powerful, controlled, acknowledging that someone tried to hijack his family's name, and offering transparency instead of retaliation. We control the narrative, Delroy said. We shine so much light, they can't hide in the shadows anymore. And if they push back, they will, Delroy said. But they'll do it in ways that make them look more desperate. Shaq stared at the mock profile of Mira's fake account one last time. The fabricated resume, the ghost transactions, the perfect for a headline sequence. It wasn't just cruel. It was methodical, meant to fracture public belief in the very thing he'd spent years defending. Black integrity, in power, clean success, uncompromised leadership. Make the leak, Shaq said. Delroy nodded, already typing. That night, Shaq returned home and sat at the edge of Mira's bed. She was awake, headphones off, watching him carefully. They tried to use your name to fake a business, he said, then used that fake to make it look like I was moving money through you. Her jaw tensed. So they wanted to make it look like I'm your cover. He nodded. That you're my puppet. She didn't cry, didn't shout, just stared forward, as if committing the pain to memory so she'd never forget who gave it to her. What do we do now? She asked. We tell the truth. Loud, clear, and first. Then we show them what legacy really looks like. Mimira reached over and took his hand. No fear. Just fire. That was the night the tide shifted. Not because the threat was gone, but because it was no longer allowed to work in the dark. They had found the vault. And now, they were the ones holding the key. It took Delroy 79 hours to triangulate the signal, trace the spoofed server, and narrow the surveillance origination point to a private residence in a suburban corridor outside Savannah. The house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac called Briar Hollow. No mailbox, no listing in local zoning records, no utilities in public databases. From the sky, it looked ordinary. Tan siding, modest size, trimmed hedges, but satellite infrared showed signs of subterranean infrastructure, heat patterns beneath the floorboards, suggesting servers, machines, and other devices well beyond a typical homeowner's needs. Shaq drove there alone. Not because Delroy advised it. In fact, he strongly didn't. But because this had become something more than strategy. This was personal now. He wore a fitted black jacket. No logos. No identifiers. His frame carried a weight that said he didn't need to threaten anyone. His presence was enough. The tires crunched softly as he parked on the opposite block and sat with the engine off, hands steady on the wheel. Across the street, the house loomed quiet. But not still. A movement behind the curtain on the second floor. A flicker in the glass. Like someone watching the watcher. There were no security cameras outside. No ring doorbell. Not even a motion light. The house looked lived in, but uninviting. A staged normalcy. The kind that whispered its lie louder, the longer you looked. Shaq waited. 3 hours. No movement. No comings or goings. But he didn't need entry to see what kind of operation this was. He observed, measured, studied patterns. The trash was never taken out. The lawn was perfectly trimmed, but no landscaping crew ever came. He jotted the license plate of the black sedan that turned into the driveway at 2:11 p.m., windows tinted. Driver alone. The man in the same gray suit, Mimera described. Shaq recognized him immediately. The same posture, the same calculating stillness. He didn't enter the house immediately, just sat in the driveway for 10 minutes, looking straight ahead. Then slowly, he got out and disappeared behind the front door. Shaq didn't follow. He watched. Not out of fear, but out of calculation. The move now wasn't confrontation. It was confirmation. Later that night, with Delroy on a remote feed and a low-light drone circling overhead, they made their move. Shaq didn't break in. He didn't sneak through windows or jimmy locks. He waited until the door opened again, this time by a delivery man, unsuspectingly carrying a box labeled server filters. The man rang the bell, looked puzzled when no one answered, and left the box on the stoop. As he turned back, the door clicked open behind him. The suited man stood there, wordless, then closed the door again. Quiet, too quiet. The drone, still hovering above, captured what Delroy had been trying to prove. Movement patterns inside the house didn't match a normal residence. No kitchen activity, no casual pacing. Instead, the rooms remained static, except the basement, where flickers of light, shifting screen tones, and heat signatures suggested constant machine operation. The next afternoon, Shaq returned, this time with a wire under his collar, and Delroy patched into an earpiece. He didn't knock. He stood at the edge of the property and waited until the man in the suit appeared on the porch like he'd been expecting him. "You've been watching my daughter," Shaq said. "Let's not pretend otherwise." The man didn't smile, didn't move. He was younger than Shaq had guessed. Late 30s, sharp cheekbones, eyes like winter steel. He wore no badge, no emblem. His name, later identified through facial recognition, was Marcus Eddings, a strategic consultant for a policy think tank that publicly claimed to support civic unity and privately funded smear operations, targeting black leadership figures. "You've mistaken coincidence for conspiracy," Marcus said, his voice level, rehearsed. "We monitor many public figures. You just happen to be one of them. You faked my daughter's bank record, her resume. You cloned her phone. What are you actually after?" Still, no expression. Truth. The real kind. The kind people like you try to sculpt into something marketable. Shaq stepped closer, calm but massive. "She's 19. You're playing politics with a kid." "She's not a kid to the media," Marcus replied. "She's a symbol, and symbols shape public momentum. Your foundation's been shifting narratives faster than legislation can keep up. That's dangerous. To certain interests." Shaq exhaled slowly. "You mean dangerous to yours?" Marcus didn't confirm, didn't deny, just turned slightly, gesturing to the door. "Would you like to see the rest?" Inside, the house was colder than the spring air outside. The walls were lined with soundproof paneling beneath standard drywall. There was no decor, no furniture for comfort, just surfaces and surveillance tables lined with hard drives, racks of labeled thumb drives, and a mounted array of live feeds on the wall, each showing profiles of public figures, both famous and unknown. Activists, donors, educators, black lawyers, college students. And in the bottom right corner, a paused image of Mira, caught mid-smile, taken during a youth rally Shaq had helped organize 3 months prior. Shaq stared at the screen. "You think collecting data gives you control?" "We don't control," Marcus said. "We contextualize. We help the public see what they're not being told." Shaq turned. "By twisting facts? By creating false ones?" Marcus's gaze didn't shift. "We redirect the spotlight where it belongs." Shaq scanned the room again. The walls didn't just watch, they curated. Names were cross-linked with donation history, voting records, even grocery preferences. Delroy spoke quietly in Shaq's ear. "This is a profiling system. They're building psychological maps, anticipating moves before they happen. This goes way beyond Mira." Shaq stepped back, his voice low but hard. "You think eroding trust is the same as finding truth, that your data makes you gods. But you forgot the one thing that doesn't fit on a spreadsheet. What people do when they're pushed too far." Marcus said nothing. Shaq walked toward the door. "You come near her again. I don't call the press. I become the press. I walk straight into every network studio in the country and show them exactly what's behind this curtain." At the door, he paused. "You picked the wrong man to make an example of." He stepped out into the light, closed the door behind him, and didn't look back. The house behind him didn't have a single window, because the people inside weren't interested in seeing the world. They were only interested in watching it break. The morning Shaq chose to go public, the skies over Atlanta were cloudless and blue, the kind of day that would usually feel like a gift. But there was a pressure beneath the air that felt anything but natural. He stood by the edge of the terrace behind his house, looking out at the tree line with hands clasped behind his back. Inside, Delroy was finalizing the file. Hundreds of megabytes of evidence, metadata from scrubbed surveillance, photos from the interior of the windowless house, financial records connecting Cartwright Holdings to multiple shell companies, even a time-stamped shot of Marcus Eddings speaking with a known private intelligence broker tied to smear campaigns against civil rights advocates. They had it all. Names, routes, tactics, and still, the weight in Shaq's chest was deeper than satisfaction. Because exposing a machine like this wasn't just about evidence, it was about the voice behind the truth, and whose mouth that truth came from. "Send it," he said flatly. Stepping back inside, Delroy clicked once, and the file package zipped off into the inboxes of 3 major investigative outlets, all simultaneously. Not gossip sites, not tabloids, real journalists, people who still believed truth was more than a commodity. "You sure about the show?" Delroy asked without looking up. "Positive," Shaq said. "No statement. No interview quotes. They don't get to summarize me. I say it myself." 2 days later, he walked into the bright lights of a nationally televised morning show. One he'd been on before, to promote youth initiatives, to smile beside kids, to make the public feel good about second chances. But this time, there was no scripted warmth. No basketball anecdotes, no feel-good nostalgia. He wore a dark suit, open collar, no tie. He looked every bit the legend he was. But today he came as something more. The host opened with caution. "You've sent shockwaves across the country, Shaquille. A lot of what you've exposed implicates organizations that work in shadows. You sure you want to do this here?" "I have to," Shaq said calmly. "They didn't just come after me. They came after my daughter. And if I stay quiet, they win. Not just in my story, but in every other person's story they're trying to erase." He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady, not rehearsed. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about blackmail. It was about control. They used technology to fabricate crimes. They cloned my daughter's identity, created false transactions, tried to paint us like we were part of some covert scheme so they could discredit everything we've built. My name, my work, my legacy. The audience was silent. "And the worst part," he continued, "it wasn't a stranger in a suit pulling strings. One of the people behind it used to sit at my table, helped shape programs we built for kids coming out of prison, helped fund the first 3 grants we handed out. Someone I trust." A name wasn't mentioned, not on the show. But it didn't need to be. Because hours later, the press outlets broke the full story, and the name came with it. Charles Dunner, former outreach strategist for the Unity Rebuild Foundation. A polished man with a clean record, and a warm smile, once photographed beside Shaq at a youth summit in Oakland, now exposed as a covert collaborator with a policy influence group, whose private communications, leaked by Delroy, included the words, "Public icons like Shaquille must be dismantled by proxy. They're too beloved to strike directly." It was the kind of betrayal that turned the stomach, not just because of what it said, but because of who said it. Charles had been there from the early days, had helped design mentorship programs, had stayed in Shaq's guest house during his divorce, had even spoken to Mara high school graduating class about character and courage. Now he was the architect of a slow character assassination aimed at both her and her father, a betrayal so layered it didn't feel like a stab in the back, but a poisoning from within. The news exploded. Every major outlet picked it up. Public forums, cable debates, editorials, all lit up with commentary. But what no one expected was how swiftly the tide turned in Shaq's favor. Not because of pity, but because of proof. The documents, the clarity, the unfiltered voice. He had brought receipts, and America was tired of sanitized lies. Support poured in. Hashtags trended. Stand with Shaq. Let the truth speak. Unshakable legacy. Civil rights leaders, media anchors, even unlikely political figures, voiced solidarity. But it wasn't just noise. It was validation. That what he'd built, the trust, the respect, the decades of goodwill, wasn't something a shadow group could unravel with forged slips and cold surveillance. But the retaliation came fast. That same week, a defamation lawsuit was filed against Shaq by a partner firm of Cartwright Holdings, a move meant to distract, to muddy the waters, to shift focus from exposure to damage control. It didn't stick legally, but it created a media headlines read, "Shaquille O'Neal, accused in fallout of shadow operation," even when the full context made it clear who was being accused of what. Shaq didn't flinch. He didn't retreat, didn't tweet, didn't spin. Instead, he walked back onto the same show 2 weeks later. Same host, same chair. They filed their lawsuit, he said. They're hoping the noise will make people forget the truth. I won't let that happen. Then he pulled out a letter, written by Mira, read aloud by him. It was short, precise, devastating. They thought they could turn me into a mistake, but all they did was prove why my father built what he did. I'm not a symbol. I'm a person, and they'll never own that. By the time the letter ended, even the host looked shaken. Behind the cameras, Delroy was already tracking the analytics, viewership peaking, social media sentiment spiking, even opposition PR firms backing down from campaigns they'd scheduled. And somewhere in a quiet office across the city, Marcus Eddings watched from a monitor, still silent. The data points he'd studied for years now useless. The narrative slipping out of his grasp. Shaq had done the unthinkable, not just exposing the machine, but surviving it, with grace, with clarity, with fire that couldn't be faked. Back at home, he found Niara waiting on the porch. Laptop open, smiling slightly. You read it like I meant it, she said.
You wrote it like a woman who knows who she is, he replied.
She closed the laptop, leaned into his side. So, what now? Shai Muski exhaled. For the first time in weeks, it felt light. Now? He said. Now we build something they can't track. The courthouse in downtown Atlanta wasn't made for spectacle. But on the day Mara testified, the cameras turned it into one. Media vans circled the block, like vultures orbiting a battlefield. Protesters and supporters, spectators and skeptics, lined the concrete steps. Some waved signs of solidarity. Others clutched smartphones, recording every twitch and turn. But inside, where the marble walls swallowed sound and the bench sat like a throne of cold impartiality, there was only focus and courage. Mara O'Neal, 19, poised in a fitted blazer and quiet resolve, sat behind the witness stand, ready to reclaim what had nearly been stolen. Her name, her identity, and her right to exist outside of someone else's constructed narrative. Her testimony wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud or tear-filled. It was measured, a calm recounting of what had happened, how her identity was stolen, how false financial documents nearly made her look complicit in crimes she didn't understand, let alone commit. She spoke not just as a daughter, but as an adult who had been manipulated without ever being touched. I didn't know someone could erase you without ever laying a hand on you, she said at one point. But that's what they tried to do, turn me into a symbol of corruption, just so they could silence what my father built. No one interrupted. Not the attorneys, not the judge. For a long moment, the silence in the room wasn't procedural. It was respect. After she stepped down, she passed Shaq in the aisle. He stood as she approached, placing one hand on her shoulder. No words were needed, just presence, just power in stillness. Outside the courtroom, the press swarmed for comment. Shaq didn't speak. Mara didn't stop. They walked straight through the questions, unbothered. The story had already been told. In court, in truth, in clarity. No soundbite could capture it now. Back home, the firestorm took on new shape. News anchors debated the ethics of political manipulation through digital identity theft. Editorials called for congressional investigations into the groups exposed in Delroy's files. Think tanks fell under scrutiny. Donations dried up for organizations once thought untouchable. But while the public reaction brought waves of support, inside the O'Neal home, the aftermath was more personal, quiet, and raw. Shaq spent more nights alone on the back porch, wrapped in thought. He wasn't brooding. He was processing. Not the betrayal from Marcus, or the lawsuit from Cartwright Holdings. Those were external, calculable. But the emotional scars, the subtle ache of watching his daughter question her reality, that was different. That lingered. Delroy, who had stayed mostly in the shadows throughout the legal proceedings, returned one evening with final updates. The fake accounts had been shut down, the banks cleared Mira's name, and every one of the forged records had been legally invalidated. You're clean, Delroy said. Both of you. Officially. Shaq gave a small nod. Official's never been the whole story. Delroy lingered in the doorway. What are you gonna do about Charles? Shaq didn't answer immediately. He just looked out at the trees again, watching the branches sway without resistance. I'm gonna remind him who he used to be. 2 days later, Shaq walked into a private meeting room at a law firm downtown, one he used when sorting foundation business. But this time there was no board, Just him. And Charles Dunner. Charles had aged in the weeks since the leak. The polish in his suit hadn't faded, but the confidence behind it had. He looked down more than up. Spoke slower. Carried himself like a man caught between justification and shame. Shaq sat across from him, not angry, not even cold, just rooted, like an unshaken monument. You ever wonder what people remember most? Shaq began. It's not the awards, not the donations. It's the trust. Charles didn't respond. I brought you in because I believed in your voice. You knew the system. You had ideas. You helped shape what we built. Charles looked up finally. And what we built got too big, too loud. You painted targets on all of us, Shaq. No, Shaq said firmly. I built mirrors, so the system could see itself. You're the one who turned them into weapons. Charles sat in silence. Guilt rolled through his shoulders. I didn't expect it to go that far, he said. The girl, I never wanted her hurt. Shaq leaned in. She's not the girl. She's my daughter. She's her own woman. And you didn't just hurt her. You tried to redefine her. You put her name in the mouth of a machine. You claimed you were fighting. Charles exhaled shakily. They promised influence. A real voice in the room. You thought silence bought you power. Shaq cut in. But you sold your soul for noise. For a long moment, the room stilled. Then Shaq stood. I'm not pressing charges, he said. Not because you don't deserve it, but because my legacy won't be built on retribution. It'll be built on the fact that I can walk away knowing I never became what they said I was. Charles said nothing more. As Shaq walked out, he didn't feel righteous. He felt resolved. The community felt it too. In the weeks that followed, rallies bloomed, not protests but gatherings of solidarity. Formerly incarcerated men spoke about how Shaq's foundation gave them a second chance. Young women from Mira School shared how her resilience inspired them to start their own advocacy group. Artists created murals of father and daughter, side by side facing forward. Shaq didn't need to say much. He just showed up, smiling, standing tall. The story wasn't one of vengeance. It was one of resistance without rage, justice without fists, and a reminder that when your truth is solid, you don't have to shout. You just have to stand. The sidewalk outside First Trust Bank looked exactly the same as it did a year ago. The same uneven cracks in the concrete. The same faded handicap sign near the front. The same crooked bench with the ad peeling from the backrest. The trees lining the curb still held their leaves in loose bundles, still rustled with every low breeze, still cast shifting shadows over passing cars. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. Shaq and Memara walked side by side, the sun filtering through the branches above them. He wore a black hoodie with no logo, jeans, and sneakers worn enough to show they'd walked miles. She had on a loose denim jacket, earbuds tucked into her collar but not playing anything, and a quiet focus in her eyes. There was no need for words. The silence between them wasn't awkward or uncertain. It was understood. They paused just outside the glass doors of the bank. People went in and out. A couple of tellers stood behind the front counter, sipping coffee and chatting quietly. The man in the gray suit was long gone. The invisible lines that once wrapped Mara in tension now dissolved. She glanced at the building, then at her father, a small smile brushing the corner of her mouth. You remember this? She asked, though the question didn't need an answer. Shaq looked at the sidewalk, the spot where she had stood with her keys in hand, a year ago. Watched, marked, manipulated. He remembered it all. But what surprised him most was how different the memory felt now. Less like a wound, more like a scar. Proof of survival. I remember not knowing how far they'd go, he said, and being afraid it wouldn't stop with you. Mira tilted her head. But it did stop. He nodded slowly. It did, because you didn't shrink, and I didn't flinch. They kept walking, turning down the next block, where the city faded into the quieter residential stretch, lined with small businesses and shaded porches. A woman watering her plants waved to Shaq without fanfare. Two boys across the street tossed a football underhand. Barely looking up, life, it seemed, had resumed. But the silence told a deeper story. Not the silence of erasure. The kind those people tried to inflict. The kind they wrapped in lies, data, fake files and twisted truths. No, this silence was earned. It was peace after fire. It was what remained when noise had burned itself out. And in that space, something new had taken root. In voiceover, the reflection settled in. Sometimes you don't win by fighting. Sometimes you win by refusing to disappear. The words didn't come from anger. They weren't about revenge or victory laps. They were about presence, endurance, the quiet triumph of remaining when someone tried to erase you. Shaq passed a mural painted on the brick wall of a small community center, two figures back to back, stylized but recognizable, a tall man in shadow and a young woman made of light. Around them were brushstrokes of color, words like truth, voice, proof, and legacy tucked inside the strokes. Nara stopped in front of it, tilting her head. I still get DMs, she said. From girls, boys too, saying I helped them find their voice. But I wasn't even trying to be an example. You didn't need to try, Shaq said. You just didn't run. She stared at the mural for a while longer. I'm thinking of starting something, a digital advocacy group, for identity defense. So kids don't get rewritten without knowing it. Shaq looked at her, really looked. Not as his daughter, not even as the survivor of what they'd lived through, but as a woman who had taken the fire meant to silence her and used it to light the way. I think that's exactly what they were afraid of, he said with a half smile. They kept walking. Shaq's mind drifted to the past. Not the headlines or interviews, but the moments in between. The quiet choices that shaped everything. Choosing to tell the story himself, instead of letting someone else filter it. Choosing not to retaliate against Charles, but to confront him with truth. Choosing to stand beside Miara, not in front of her. Legacy wasn't always what you left behind. Sometimes it was what you held on to. And in that space where the camera lenses had turned away, where the public had moved on to the next scandal, Shaq found the clearest picture of himself. Not as a legend, not as a figure, but as a father, as a man who stood in the crosshairs of erasure and never blinked. Justice, he thought, ain't always loud. Sometimes it's just you showing up, over and over, until the lie runs out of breath. They reached the corner and paused at the light. Across the street stood a new co-op bookstore with a chalkboard sign that read, "Your name is your story. Don't let anyone write it for you." Miara laughed under her breath. Think they know? Shaq shrugged. Think they remember? The light changed. They crossed. And behind them, the mural caught the last light of the afternoon, glowing in the silence that only truth could leave behind. Not every fight leaves bruises. Some just leave questions. If this story made you pause, it's because parts of it are real, maybe too real. Keep your eyes open, your voice ready, and your name yours. Because stories like this aren't fiction. They're warnings written one step ahead.